Enzo Ferrari's Scuderia Ferrari was contracted to run Alfa's racing program. The Scuderia was more autonomous, and the now famous prancing horse replaced the Quattrofolio on the official Alfa Romeo team cars. The withdrawal in fact amounted to the retirement of the P3, and Ferrari had to make do with the Monza, and they were now up against stiffer opposition from Bugatti and Maserati with their new 8CM 3000. The 8C 2300 sports cars were still carrying all before them, Nuvolari winning Le Mans with Raymond Sommer and the Mille Miglia with Campari. The 1932 and 33 seasons were the peak years for the Italians, before the arrival of Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union. With the Monza, Alfa suffered reliability problems. Nuvolari moved to the Maserati team during 1933 and won the Belgian Grand Prix, the Coppa Ciano and the Nice Grand Prix, all in the 8CM 3000. Meanwhile, Alfa Romeo, with assistance from Pirelli and concerned by Maserati's success, let the P3s return to the circuits, and they soon started to win again. A terrible day at Monza in 1933 resulted in the deaths of 3 drivers, Campari and Borzacchini, who crashed on the south curve on oil dropped by another car, and Count Zukowski. This was an enormous blow to Italian racing. Alfa had some success in 1934 before the German juggernaut got into gear. The Algerian driver Guy Moll won at Monaco, and Chiron won the French Grand Prix at Montlhéry when the Germans retired. But the driver everyone looked at was Tazio Nuvolari. He liked to sit well back from the wheel, taking corners like a slalom skier, flinging the car, sliding it round in first of the 4-wheel drifts, with little or no use of the brakes, and the car perfectly straight to accelerate out of the corner. Nuvolari was the first to develop this style. The crowd loved his antics and his driving style, which was a complete contrast with his more conventional rival, Achille Varzi. Few other champions have been as versatile as Nuvolari, who could drive anything. He was never discouraged, even if he started the race in an inferior car or in plaster from a previous accident. In 1935, the German team were dominant except for Tazio Nuvolari, who took no notice, defeating the Mercedes and Auto Unions at home in the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. As a purely Scuderia Ferrari venture, Luigi Bazzi designed B-Motori cars for racing and record attempts. They had 2 P3 engines, one in front of and one behind the driver. They were prodigiously fast, if a little unreliable, and very difficult to drive. This B-Motori has been restored by Tom Wheatcroft's Donington Museum. It first came to Britain in the 30s. For 1936, Alfa Romeo produced 2 cars, the straight-8 3.8-litre Type 8C35 and the 4-litre V12 12C36. At Monaco, Nuvolari duelled with Rudolf Caracciola, but couldn't hold off the Mercedes. Caracciola in the Mercedes wins at Monaco. Occasionally in a 12C, Nuvolari beat the Germans. Refusing to admit defeat, he won the prestigious Vanderbilt Cup on the Roosevelt Raceway at Long Island in New York. In those days, when you won a cup, you won a cup. These were the last real Grand Prix successes for Alfa Romeo before the Second World War. As the German teams became more dominant, the Italians were outclassed and outfinanced. Adolf Hitler decided to put money into the German teams for propaganda purposes, and the Italians couldn't or wouldn't compete. Either way, Mussolini was unwilling to support them to the same extent. At the end of 1937, Vittorio Jano left Alfa Romeo to join Lancia, being replaced by the more politically acceptable Wilfredo Ricart. For 1938, a number of significant changes had taken place in the Alfa Romeo racing setup. The responsibility for running the works cars was taken away from Ferrari, and now it was the responsibility of chief engineer Ricart. Although 3-litre cars were produced for the 1938 and 1940 Formula 1, which stipulated a maximum capacity of 3 litres supercharged and 4.5 litres unsupercharged, the Alfa Romeo directors realised that they had little hope of doing well against the Germans. Their real hopes rested with a new 158 Voiturette. This model was the result of close cooperation between Colombo and Enzo Ferrari, while Ricart, whom Ferrari disliked, had little to do with it. Despite being soundly beaten by the one-off Mercedes W163 in Tripoli, the Alfa had the measure of everything else. In 1938, Alfa Romeo set the standard in racing with their new 158. After some initial clutch problems had been overcome, these cars had a number of victories in Italian races and at the Prix de Berne, won by Farina. The 8-cylinder 1500cc supercharged car originally developed 190 brake horsepower, and this was increased in 1939 to 225. Europe was in disarray after the war, with damaged or destroyed factories across the continent. To get ordinary motor cars back into production was a major feat. Those who wanted to return to motor racing had to tread carefully. The post-war Grand Prix formula was sensible in that it called for 1.5-litre supercharged cars and 4.5-litre unblown ones. The Italians were in the strongest position. The pre-war 158 Alfa Romeo had survived, and the 4CL Maserati was equally ideally suited to the conditions of the day. It was the Tipo 158 Alfa Romeo that was the most significant Grand Prix contender during the period of 1946 to 1951. By sensibly continuing the development of their existing design, Alfa Romeo managed to outpace their rivals. Their straight 8 now produced 310 brake horsepower, giving them the edge. The Alfettas made their first post-war appearance at St. Cloud in 1946, driven by Farina and Vermeil. Both retired, the only time the car started and didn't win between 1946 and 1951. Alfa then won the Grand Prix des Nations at Geneva and the Milan Grand Prix. Maseratis, driven by Villaraci and the new rising star, Alberto Ascari, won a number of races, including the Nice Grand Prix. '48 saw the French driver Jean-Pierre Vermeil winning the French, Italian and Milan Grand Prix and coming second in the Swiss to his teammate Count Trossi. Unfortunately, Achille Varzi had been killed in practice for the Swiss Grand Prix, having returned